Just how bad are things for Russian troops on the front lines? Well, intercepted phone calls between a soldier and his father might give us some insight into just how much the Ukrainian attritional strategy is paying off. Let's get into it. Okay, first, this is always coming to us from Insight from Ukraine and Russia. His channel's great. You guys, I'd link it in the description. I only look at like 1%, 1/10 of his total content. He has so many good interceptions. I don't know what his insider source is, but wherever he gets it, you guys should definitely check it out. So let's get into it.
You're going to hear two intercepted phone calls, both of them one-sided. In the first one, you're going to hear a father calling his Russian son soldier who's in Ukraine. So let's listen to it.
Привет, сынок. Здорово. Не бухаешь, смотрю, бухой, что ли? Ну, ясно. Техника хоть есть, пушки, минометы, танки.
Yeah, so this is interesting, right? Drinking in a combat zone in the U.S. military when we were deployed, the rule was no alcohol of any kind. And that was for obvious reasons, right? The threat was persistent. It was constant. You always had to be at your sharpest, ready to engage with the enemy, whether you were on a fob or on patrol. And the worst war crime, the worst massacre in U.S. Modern history in either of those wars was perpetrated by a soldier who had illicitly gotten alcohol. His name was Robert Bales. He was actually, it was a perfect storm. He was an infantry soldier who was assigned to a special forces team. So he was operating with a special forces like level of autonomy, but with a regular infantryman level of training. He had also suffered a TBI in Iraq, and then he was provided steroids by his special forces team. The investigation was unable to determine who gave him the steroids. Okay. But all the special forces guys were seen conducting an early morning like burn pit before the investigators showed up. So, Robert Bales was found to be on steroids. He was on methylquine, which is a anti-malarial drug that in some cases produces some psychiatric effects. And of course, he was drinking. So combining all of those together with the fact that, again, members of his unit had recently been hit and seriously wounded, he left his base, again, while pretty intoxicated, and killed, I think it was like 14 or 18 Afghan men, women, and children. And then just crawled back to his forward operating base. It's a really strange story and tragic, but those are the sort of reasons that drinking in a war zone is generally seen as a bad idea.
Нет, это вообще хоть вооружение есть? Что, ни танков нет, ни БМ-пушек, ничего нет?
So what he's describing is, of course, a lot of major targets that we've heard from other sources that Ukraine has been on a big campaign of interdicting Russian munitions. And remember, when you target supplies, you think of them as food, water, bullets. But remember, supplies are also fuel and oils for tanks, spare parts for artillery pieces, right? So one by one, if you can't get spare parts, every time you have a tank or artillery piece break, it's going to have to come off the front line and go to the depot. So when they say, oh, you have no tanks, no IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, nothing. Yes, where is all of it? It could be simply awaiting parts.
А где это все? Короче, там только чтобы все есть. Короче, просрали все вооружение, все пропили. А то показывают танки, там Т-90.
Yeah, so here's what he's saying. He's saying that when he says they blabber on, it's a reference to probably the commentators on Russian state TV. when they say there's old stuff, it's a reference to the fact that in the Soviet era, the Soviet Union produced absolutely eye-watering numbers of tanks, IFVs, infantry kits, helmets, armor, RPGs, weapons. And the reason they did so is because the experience that the Soviets had in World War II, where they had tons of manpower, but they were unable to generate the logistical backbone to equip an army. And they took huge numbers of casualties in that conflict and lost huge numbers of equipment. Ultimately, they were saved by both their own willingness to continually move their war production east away from the invading Germans, and also because the United States, because it was not subject to land invasion, produced an eye-watering amount of equipment that they then sent to troops in the USSR. After that experience, the Soviets were like, we will never allow ourselves to be in that situation again. So they produced several armies worth of tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, equipment, and they designed them not to be excellent, but to be pretty mediocre pieces of equipment, but cheap to produce, easy to train up new soldiers on, easy to get out into the field, fairly easy to maintain. That was the idea, right? They viewed scale as sort of quantity has a quality all its own. And so while none of it was great, there was tons of it. And it's all been mothballed. So it's in Soviet stores somewhere if it hasn't been sold off or stripped for parts. But they're trying to remove all this from storage, return it to active service, and get it to the front line. Because even an old, out-of-date tank is still better than no tank at all. When they say they messed up all the weaponry, again, prior reference to it's broken and they can't get parts.
Просто. А то парятся постоянно там какой-то Санкт-Петербург, там это, Китай там помогает.
This is really interesting. They say that there's some TOS-1. TOS-1, it's identified in Russian as a flamethrower system, but what it actually is a thermobaric rocket launcher. It's the Russian version of an MLRS, and it seems to be, in Russian doctrine, much more forward deployed and frequently used than NATO countries. NATO countries just prefer to be a little more strategic and surgical with their even artillery rounds, but Russia just doesn't prioritize highly accurate systems. And so it uses things like the TOS-1, a thermobaric rocket launcher, to soften up targets by just brutally hitting them with thermobaric rockets. And what's even more interesting is when they talk about China helping out there and sending stuff. So China isn't helping out. They are selling the Russians gear. And while the sanctions from the West generally do not allow, or China doesn't want to confront the West over sending weapons to Russia, what they've done is send dual-use equipment. Dual-use equipment is equipment that can be both military and civilian use. So, for example, hunting rifles, right? And as we looked at in another video here, I'll try to pull it up for you. I think it's called a QBZ-1 hunting rifle. Right. I'll show you this dual-use military technology. Let's see. This is an article from Politico. Says hunting rifles. Really? China ships weapons and body armor. Let's see. Oh, CQA. As you can see, this CQA is a civilian hunting rifle. That is what's being sold to Russia as civilian hunting rifles. Looks a little familiar, huh? Looks like a real good quality hunting rifle. And as you can see, it has only two settings, safe and semi. But without full auto feature, it's a hunting rifle, right? Of course, it may also go to other paramilitaries in China, Philippines, South Sudan, Paraguay. And what's interesting, there's other dual-use items, including body armor. And some of them are quite good, right? Chinese body armor that sells it. Oh yeah, here we go. Here's a picture of a buyer. China secretly sends enough gear to Russia to equip an army. And look at all those plate carriers. They look very familiar, right? We've seen almost all of them in a Russian soldier somewhere. So I point this out because, again, he's not wrong. China is sending gear, and the gear is serviceable, right? I wouldn't will it go toe to toe with U.S. gear? Probably not, but it will stop. By all accounts, the body armor seems to be effective at stopping a round. We've seen some footage from the front lines actually indicating that, hey, the plates are able to eat AR rounds as they're rated. So again, it doesn't have to be the 10 out of 10 gear. If you get 9 out of 10 gear, 8 out of 10 gear from China, and it works well enough, and you get a lot of it, then it can be functional in its own right.
Это нас уже надо, половина нашей техники, наверное, у хохлов уже находится. Потому что пока там танки бросили, там, а? Сколько осталось? Да ну, ну а где же и не хоронят никого? Ну они же и домой не звонят уже тогда выходят. Так что одни кости останутся.
So it seems he's alluding to the fact that in some cases, it appears that Russian forces end up retreating in such a disarray that they often don't recover the bodies of fallen comrades. And again, we've seen that in some of the aftermath footage of the Battle of Orozane, where Russian forces appeared to retreat in relative disarray and were cut down by cluster munitions. But you saw dozens of bodies left on the roadway as their comrades retreated from them. So it's a tough. The war sounds like it's gotten brutal. It sounds like a lot of Russian morale and unit cohesion is broken down. Unfortunately, I have done reactions to that footage, but it's available only on combatvetnews.com. I can't even show you the thumbnail without it getting demonetized. That's how intense it is. So, I run this like a Patreon. Any one of these tiers gets you access to the members only content. And it's the best way to support the channel. You guys see, I don't get that many sponsors anymore. I'm regularly demonetized. Big tech just isn't a fan of war content. But if you're interested in supporting what I do, you can check the link in the description or the link up there. Go to combatvetnews.com/become a member. So thanks again.
Ранятые убьют, тоже останется там лежать. Ну ясно. Что нет в России не.
Damn, it's brazen, but it's not. It's true. There's all just a bunch of lies. And here's the nefarious thing: is that we've looked at some of the Russian propaganda videos. Oftentimes, they're not lies per se. They are true statements that have all relevant context removed from them. The essential context or the big picture is just excluded, right? It's what they don't say that creates the propaganda. So they'll say a true statement. For example, they might say, we have hundreds of T-90 tanks on the front lines. Not realizing that in the grand scheme of things, 100 tanks is tiny. I'm making these numbers up. But Russia may sit there and go, well, we've inflicted massive casualties on the Ukrainians. But if Russia has taken even more casualties, right? And words like massive, they don't mean anything. I mean, 3 casualties is massive to a squad. So, right, when you divorce context, when you avoid specifics, when you can shape any narrative you want. And that's what we've seen Russian propaganda doing. There's also, of course, they create a false dichotomy in which they present 2 sides to the debate, but oftentimes both sides are based on some of the same assumptions, or the opposition side is so comically inept and so obviously wrong that it makes it feel like there's 2 sides, but really there's only one reasonable side. For example, saying, "Oh, should we adopt more dogs, or should we have all dogs be euthanized?" Well, people are like, "Well, I don't want to euthanize dogs." Well, there's lots of options for a city to manage an out-of-control dog population. But if you create a false dichotomy in which one choice is unacceptable, again, you can manipulate public opinion to support the other side.
Совсем ясно. Куда еще ринулись на Украину? Сами они там переваривались, но поехали помогать. Давай.
That father is starting to see Russia as it is, full of lies, but still he thinks that something would have happened in Ukraine even without Russian invasion, which is not true at all. Anyway, let's listen to the second intercepted phone call. You'll hear a soldier calling his mother. He's from DPR, but he's serving in the Russian Corps.
Алло, мамуль.
Right. We got to remember that the DPR is the initially was the breakaway republic that Russia declared as independent at the start of the invasion, but then it declared the DPR was part of Russia, and then declared the DPR's military or militia was actually part of the Russian military. So they're fraught, but remember the DPR troops are frighteningly poorly trained and have taken frighteningly high casualty rates.
Приветик. Да нет, это наши стреляют. Да, на завтра, то смотри, это как... Я пока, тут. Я там сейчас на медроте закажу форму, чтобы вот это на деньги, на экспертизу. Вот, потом буду возвращаться к Жеке.
Interesting. Forensic exam reimbursement. He may be describing sort of like in the US, we have this process where if you're wounded or you have a medical issue as a result of your service, you need to create a level of documentation around it. You need to have some sort of proof that you had this issue while you were in the service, that it's directly service related. A very common issue is that soldiers will develop a problem in their backs or hips or knees, and they will ignore it during their service. They don't want to come off mission. They're mission-focused people. And then after they leave service, they go, oh, well, actually, guys, my knees have been bad the whole time. And the VA goes, well, your knees were fine when you were in service, according to our records. And now that you've left, you're saying your knees hurt. Well, maybe it's because you're not working out, or you gained weight, or you hurt them while you were doing something stupid on leave or as a civilian. And the problem is you have no documentation to prove it. So savvy soldiers will get told by their leadership, hey, if you have an ache, a pain, an issue, go to sick call. Even if all they do is give you Tylenol, you go to create a paper trail so that when you leave, you get there and you go, hey, I didn't have bad knees before I went to the military, but now I do. And look, every year I was in the doctor with bad knees. So now that I'm getting out, now I am entitled to a level of disability compensation because I was injured because of my military service. And it's not just combat service. Again, if I was smarter, I had a number of buddies. Sleep apnea, super common here in the US. I actually think that most people should, like almost everyone in the military gets screened for sleep apnea when they try to do the disability game, because I don't want to say almost everyone gets it. Virtually everyone I know gets a sleep apnea diagnosis. And the appeal is that sleep apnea is like a 40% disabling condition. So the VA will give you a significant disability rating as a result of something as common as sleep apnea. Worth thinking about. So, again, if you're in service, those guys will often get coached. What common ailments will get you a disability rating that are extremely pervasive in the general population and in the population of soldiers? And they will intentionally go in with the right sort of words to get it. And you know what? I know you're like, oh, you're telling people that they scam the government. One, no, because a doctor goes and makes a diagnosis. Two, if you think that soldiers getting $600 a month is a criminal level of scamming, guys, wait till you hear about Lockheed Martin. Wait till you hear about the F-35, right? Every one of those dog shit garbage planes is absolutely one of those planes offsets a generation of soldiers getting $600 a month disability payments. And it's unlike Lockheed Martin executives, soldiers actually put up They actually put on the stupid uniform. They go do the hard, dangerous jobs. So F them. Give them $600 a month, especially now they redid the retirement that oftentimes soldiers serve and don't get peanuts for it. Sorry, rant complete. Let's get back into it.
Потому что тут меня долго не продержат, меня куда-то переведут, хрен знает куда, понимаешь. Тут, мам, тут вот вообще такое творится, я тебе говорю. Вот у нас мужик, мужик, ему в Москве делали операцию, какие-то пружины ставили в сердце. Вы годны, вы здоровы. Пацан слепой.
Okay, putting in a stent is what they do for someone with a heart attack. That's wild.
Рук своих не видит. Ты здоровый. Короче, всем дают категорию Г, а это, типа, годный.
That is also wild. I mean, because you can wear glasses in the military, but your vision has to be able to be corrected to a pretty high level, to 20/20. And again, this sounds like functionally blind.
Единственное, что могут дать там отпуск месяц, типа, подлечиться, короче. Когда все возмущаются, что лбы горят, а вот россиянин, говорит, там беженцев, говорит, Сечутова из Украины, говорит, в России, получают по 40 тысяч. Отлавливайте и сюда отправляйте, хай воюют.
Yeah, so this is an interesting talk. When he talks about refugees from Ukraine, Russia is pulling from its old Soviet playbook. And what the Soviet Union would do and what Russia's doing in Ukraine, according to a lot of reports, is they are trying to build a pro-Russian population on a generational level, right? So today, the occupied regions of Ukraine have a lot of Ukrainians who don't want the Russians there, but they don't have a choice because Russian forces are occupying their country militarily. But the goal is to have a population that identifies with the Russian government and supports being a part of Russia. Well, to do that, two things have to happen. Pro-Ukrainian or Ukrainians have to go out and pro-Russian Russians have to come in. So that's what Russia's been doing. There's rumors that a lot of children, a lot of widows and displaced civilians in the Russian-occupied regions are being forcibly relocated into Russia, ostensibly for humanitarian reasons, and that a lot of Russians are being moved into these regions as part of an effort to Russify the areas, make them more pro-Russian, so that even if Ukraine did liberate them, they would be liberating towns, again, that are become heavily pro-Russian. And yes, paying them to move is an easy way to do it.
5. А я не на передке, я на второй линии обороны. Это кто на первой линии обороны? Мама, это у тебя передок. А вот, короче, где это? Те, кто сидят в городе, получают по 20 тысяч, по 28.
Yeah, this is a classic mom move. Moms assume that every soldier is always on the front lines. And you know, I wouldn't trade places, right? I knew every day when I woke up. I knew when I was well fed. I knew when I was relatively safe. And I knew when I was in danger, but at least I could get myself out of danger. For your mom, you have this kid, you have no idea what's happening to them. You have no idea, not a clue. And it's really hard. It's so hard because you just worry every day.
Я тебе серьезно говорю, мама. Ну ты не равняй россиян и нас. Я же отношусь к первому российскому корпусу, а они, наверное, там от российских этих, ну, тут же, мама, короче, до 26-го года, сказали, будет вот такая вот жопа. Россия будет долго.
Interesting that the rumors are it'll continue until 2026, so another 3 years.
Да, вот такая же. Нет, ну, освобождать территории там будут, а я имею в виду, что вот это вот неразбериха в документах, вот это вот неравноправие.
Okay, it sounds like he's talking maybe about some sort of process for integrating the DPR into Russia. I've never heard anything about this. Or maybe their plan is to be integrated with Russia until 2026, and then the DPR will be independent again. It sounds weird, but Russia's been playing weird games with this DPR LNR relationship for a while.
Правее, короче. Да, понял.
Now guys, I'm gonna ask you to help me to boost this video on YouTube by smashing a like button, by leaving a comment and subscribing to my channel.
Already
Thank
subscribed.
you for this.
You guys should do the same. Link is in the comments if you appreciate what he does. It makes a huge difference. Anyway, guys, thank you. Thanks to everybody who supports me, especially the members of combatvetnews.com and everyone who's liked and subscribed to my videos, especially our colonel tier members and our lieutenant tier members, and all the members of Combat Vet News. I appreciate you guys so much, and I will see you all in the next one. Cheers.